Welcome to Acts of Kindness, where real stories touch the heart. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Now let's get started. Ethan had always been proud of his vintage Rolls-Royce, a masterpiece that stood as a symbol of wealth and prestige. But on this particular afternoon in Dallas, it failed him. In the most humiliating way, the car refused to start, sitting lifeless outside his estate gates. Several elite mechanics had already tried and failed to repair it, each leaving with the same excuse: the engine was beyond saving. Frustration boiled inside Ethan, and though he didn't show it, the breakdown of the car felt like a crack in his image. For him, this wasn't just a machine, it was his pride. As Ethan paced around angrily, a dusty pickup pulled up near the gates. Out stepped Daniel, a 36-year-old street mechanic whose hands told stories of hard labor, stained with grease and marked with scars. He wasn't the kind of man Ethan expected to see near his estate, yet Daniel's calm confidence caught his attention. Daniel approached the silent car, his eyes scanning it as though he could hear its unspoken cries. "I can try fixing it," he said, his tone steady. Ethan smirked, half amused, and replied, "If you can fix this, I'll give you anything." Ethan's daughter, Isabella, had just returned home from New York and happened to overhear the exchange. At 28, she was elegant, graceful, and accustomed to people impressing her with wealth or titles. But this man looked different, ordinary yet strong, and with a quiet pride in his work. Her father, half joking and half testing, added with a teasing smile, "Marry my daughter if you fix this Rolls-Royce." Isabella flushed with embarrassment, though a small smile tugged at her lips. Daniel didn't flinch at the words. He simply nodded and knelt by the car, tools in hand, ready to work. The hours that followed tested Daniel's patience and skill. The engine was stubborn, its parts outdated and fused with age. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but his focus never broke. Ethan watched, at first with skepticism, muttering that no one could do what professionals had failed at. But Isabella stood by the window, upstairs, watching quietly as Daniel worked. There was something admirable about the way he treated the car, not with arrogance, but with respect, as though he believed it still had life within it. For Isabella, this moment sparked a fascination she couldn't explain. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. After hours of labor, Daniel tightened the last bolt and wiped his brow. Silence filled the air as he climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a roar, the engine came alive, stronger than it had in years. The sound echoed against the estate walls, startling Ethan into silence. His eyes widened in disbelief, while Isabella gasped softly, her heart racing at the sight. Daniel stepped out calmly as if it were just another day. Ethan couldn't believe it. The impossible had been done, and not by one of his high-priced experts, but by a simple street mechanic. His pride clashed with awe as he looked at Daniel, unsure of how to respond. "You actually did it," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. Isabella, however, couldn't hold back her admiration. She smiled genuinely, something rare in her world of formality and expectations. Daniel, humble as ever, simply nodded and replied, "It wasn't impossible. It just needed someone willing to believe it could work again." In that moment, the heiress saw him differently. Ethan stood still, his wealthy pride wrestling with gratitude. He had made the marriage remark as a joke, never expecting this mechanic to succeed where professionals had failed. But now his words echoed awkwardly in the air. Daniel remained calm, wiping the grease from his hands as if the promise meant nothing to him. "I didn't do this for reward," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying more weight than any boast. Isabella felt her heart stir. In a world where everyone chased her family's fortune, here was a man who valued dignity above wealth. That difference made him unforgettable. Later that evening, Isabella found herself outside under the soft glow of the estate's garden lights. She approached Daniel as he packed his tools into the back of his worn truck. Her voice was gentle but curious. "You really weren't tempted by my father's words?" Daniel shook his head with a faint smile. "Marriage isn't a prize, miss, and respect isn't something money can buy." For the first time in years, Isabella laughed genuinely, realizing how refreshing it was to hear honesty unclouded by ambition. Something about his humility unsettled her carefully ordered world. Inside, Ethan wrestled with his thoughts. He had spent his life surrounded by people who flattered him, yet none could do what this mechanic had done. The more he thought about Daniel, the more respect he felt, though pride made it hard to admit. Eventually, he called Daniel back inside. "You've proven yourself," Ethan said firmly, though not without hesitation. "I don't hand out praise lightly. You fixed what others couldn't. If nothing else, you've earned my respect and perhaps more." For Ethan, admitting this was no small act, but Isabella noticed how sincere her father had become. The following week, Daniel found himself receiving a surprising call. Isabella had arranged for him to come back, not as a mechanic, but as a consultant for the family's foundation projects. She explained that someone with his resilience and practical mind could offer insights her world often lacked. At first, Daniel resisted. He was just a street mechanic, a widower raising his son, not someone who belonged in mansions and boardrooms. But Isabella's words stayed with him. Sometimes the right people aren't those with the richest titles, but those with the richest hearts. Slowly, Daniel began to consider it. As weeks turned into months, Daniel's presence grew in their lives. Isabella often visited his small workshop, curious about the world outside her wealth. She found herself laughing more, asking questions about engines and life, and appreciating simplicity in ways she never had. Daniel's son, Ben, became fond of her too, and she found joy in his innocence and warmth. Ethan observed all of this quietly. At first, he worried his daughter's heart was drifting towards someone beneath their class. But over time, even he saw that Daniel brought out a happiness in Isabella money had never achieved. One evening, Isabella walked with Daniel through the estate gardens, the air cool and quiet around them. She stopped, turning to him with a look both tender and certain. "Do you realize you've changed us?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, his gaze steady yet humble. "Maybe I just fixed more than an engine." In that moment, Isabella realized her father's challenge, once meant as a joke, had turned into something deeper. The mechanic who refused to take her as a prize had become the man she admired most. And though neither spoke the words yet, both knew destiny had shifted.